The golden light of late afternoon filtered through the windows of the Harrison Private Club, casting long shadows across the Italian marble that David had known since childhood. The aroma of Cuban cigars mingled with the expensive perfume of white orchids decorating each table, creating that atmosphere of privilege he breathed like air. But in that moment, as Michael slid a photograph across the mahogany table, David's world was about to tilt on its own axis. Two people can look at the same situation and see completely different universes, he said, his fingers drumming nervously against the leather armchair. I had no idea I was about to discover this in the most painful way possible. 35 years building a real estate empire. 35 years proving that every investment, every risk, every cold decision could be measured in numbers. David Harrison had transformed empty lots into skyscrapers, forgotten neighborhoods into luxury complexes, abstract dreams into concrete. Fortunes. His shoulders carried the confidence of someone who had never encountered a challenge that money couldn't solve. On the streets outside, Manhattan's movement followed its relentless rhythm. Hurried executives, dazzled tourists, street vendors shouting offers, all navigating the same urban maze, but in parallel realities that rarely touched. It was easy to forget that other versions of life were happening simultaneously, other stories being written in languages he had never learned to read. What David didn't know was that on the other side of those tempered glass windows, sitting on a fire escape of an abandoned building, a 20-year-old young woman was about to teach him that some lessons don't come in spreadsheets, that some values don't appear in financial reports, and that sometimes the people who have the least are the ones who have the most to offer. Prove it, Michael had said, pushing that photograph in his direction. Prove you can turn anything into gold. David picked up the photo. A young brunette woman, too thin, lifeless hair falling over her face, sitting on a sidewalk with a book in her hands. Her eyes, even in the grainy image, carried something he couldn't name. It wasn't despair. It wasn't resignation. It was something more complex, deeper. Her, said Michael, lighting a cigar with calculated movements. 3 months. Transform her into a lady worthy of frequenting our circles. Real marriage? Complete celebration, convincing enough to fool even your mother. 2 million if you succeed. David's stomach contracted slightly. Not because of the money, 2 million was just numbers in an already abundant bank account, but because of Michael's tone, the way he had chosen that word, her, as if the person in the photograph were an object, a project, an investment with potential returns. And if I refuse? David asked, although he already knew he wouldn't refuse. 35 years of competition had shaped reflexes that functioned even before conscious thought. Then we'll have our answer about whether you really understand people or if you only work with easy money. The words hung in the air like cigar smoke, impossible to ignore. David looked at the photograph again. The young woman was reading, concentrated, oblivious to the camera observing her. There was something about her posture, erect despite circumstances, dignified even in precariousness, that made him hesitate for a moment, but only for a moment. The corner of 42nd Street and 8th Avenue bustled with the organized chaos of a Tuesday afternoon in Manhattan. Street vendors competed for space with lost tourists, while the smell of baked pretzels mixed with diesel from buses passing at regular intervals. David adjusted his Hermes tie knot, feeling for the first time the inadequacy of his $3,000 suit in that environment. Maya Johnson was exactly where Michael had said she would be, sitting on the steps of a commercial building that had closed months ago, her back against the glass door covered with for rent signs. She held a book, Fundamentals of Nursing, he managed to read when he approached, and her concentration was so intense that she didn't initially notice his presence. 20 years old. She looked even younger in person, but there was something in her eyes that suggested she had lived decades in just a few years. Her brown hair, dried out from malnutrition, was tied in an improvised bun with what appeared to be a rubber band found on the street. A small mole on the left side of her face was partially hidden by a rebellious strand she kept strategically positioned. David stopped 3 meters away, observing. Maya nibbled her lower lip while reading, a habit that made her keep her mouth closed. He would only discover later that it was to hide crooked teeth. Her clothes, clearly the only ones she owned, were clean despite the wear. She had found a way to wash them, to maintain some dignity even when everything else had collapsed. "Excuse me," he said finally, his voice sounding louder than intended against the traffic noise. Maya looked up from the book, and David felt a shock of recognition he couldn't explain. He didn't know her, that was certain, but there was something familiar in the way she looked at him, not with the deference he was accustomed to receiving, nor with the hostility he might expect. It was an evaluative look, careful, as if she were measuring not his wealth, but his character. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said, closing the book but keeping her finger marking the page. "I'm just reading." "No, that's not it." David moved closer one step, conscious that every movement was important. Too quick an approach and she would flee. Too hesitant and she would be suspicious. "I wanted to make a professional proposal." "Professional?" Maya repeated the word as if it were foreign. Her eyes quickly moved down his suit, calculating. "Seriously? You're seeing where I am?" It was a fair question. David looked around. The worn steps, the plastic bags beside her obviously containing all her belongings, the way she automatically pulled those bags closer when he approached. How to explain that he had a $200,000 proposal for someone who probably didn't have 200 in her pocket? "I see a young woman who even here is trying to learn something," he said, gesturing to the book in her hands. For the first time, Maya seemed surprised. She looked at the book as if she had forgotten she was holding it, then back at him. "It's from the library," she explained quickly. "I return it on time. I'm not stealing anything." "I know." David sat on the step beside her, ignoring what the $3,000 suit would suffer from the rough concrete. "Can I ask why nursing?" The question seemed to disarm her. Maya looked at her own hands. "Clean," he noted, despite everything, before answering. "I took care of my mother for 8 years, she said simply. "Cancer. I learned a lot in the process. I thought maybe I could help other people." "Did she recover?" "No." The word came out without emotion, but David saw how Maya's fingers tightened around the book. "She died a year ago, left some medical debts. I lost the house, had no close relatives. It's a long story and not very interesting." But it was interesting, David realized. It was more interesting than any financial report he had read in the last year. Here was someone who had spent her entire adolescence caring for a dying person who had lost everything and was still sitting on Manhattan steps studying how to care for other people. "What kind of professional proposal?" Maya asked, bringing him back to the moment. David took a deep breath. How to explain without sounding completely insane? "I'll be direct. I need a wife for a year. Family matters. I'll pay $200,000. Maya blinked, then blinked again. For a moment, David thought she would laugh, or scream, or simply get up and leave. Instead, she closed the book completely and turned to face him. $200,000, she repeated slowly. "Why?" "That's a lot of money." "A lot of money. Let's say I need to appear stable for business. Image matters. You help me, I help you. But why me?" The question was asked without self-pity, just genuine curiosity. You could choose any rich woman, any model, any normal person. David hesitated. How to explain that rich women came with expectations, that models came with agendas, that normal people would ask questions he wasn't prepared to answer? "Because rich women have expectations," he said finally. "You understand this is business, not romance." Maya was silent for a long moment. David could hear her breathing, slightly accelerated, mixed with the traffic noise around them. She was processing, calculating, weighing options he couldn't imagine. "And after?" she asked, her voice almost inaudible. "After you'll have enough money to start any life you want. Your own house, college, whatever you dream of." Maya looked at the book in her hands, then at the plastic bags, then at the abandoned building behind her. David saw the exact moment she made the decision. Not with joy, not with relief, but with the tired resignation of someone who had learned that sometimes you accept the rope someone throws you, even without knowing if the person on the other end is your salvation or your perdition. "When do we start?" she asked. Maya just accepted a proposal that could change her life forever. If you were in her place, would you make the same choice? Comment, "Accept," if you would also take this risk. David's mansion in the Upper East Side seemed even larger, viewed from inside. Maya stopped at the entrance of the main hall, her head tilting back to observe the crystal chandelier hanging 3 meters above like a captured constellation. The echo of her steps on the marble made her move on tiptoes, as if she We're visiting a museum after permitted hours. This is too big, she murmured, instinctively pulling a strand of hair to cover the mole on her face. I don't... Look at me. David, who was observing her reaction, felt something uncomfortable move in his chest. He had expected dazzlement or at least curiosity. Instead, Maya seemed embarrassed, as if her presence there were an obvious mistake that everyone would notice. You'll get used to it, he said, leading her up the mahogany staircase. Tomorrow morning a team comes to help you. Help me with what? David hesitated mid-step. How to explain without sounding cruel? How to say she needed to be completely rebuilt without admitting he saw her as a renovation project? Well, appearance, etiquette, those things. Maya stopped climbing. Her fingers automatically went to her teeth, touching them through her closed lip. Oh, she said simply. Of course. The guest room David had prepared was larger than the entire house where Maya had grown up. A king-size bed dominated the center, covered with sheets that cost more than she had earned in any month working part-time during high school. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Central Park, where trees swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. This is your room, David said, placing Maya's 2 plastic bags on an Italian armchair she would never dare use. The closet is empty, but that will change quickly. There's a whirlpool tub, spa products, everything you need. Maya walked to the window, her hands lightly touching the glass. Below, people ran along the park paths, living lives that seemed simultaneously familiar and impossible to reach. David, she said without turning around, why are you doing this? It was a simple question with too complicated an answer. How to explain about Michael, about the bet, about the compulsive need to prove he could transform anything into success. How to admit she was essentially an experiment. Because I thought, I could help you, he said, choosing the safest partial truth. But you don't even know me. No, but I saw how you were reading that book, as if every page were important, as if you were memorizing every word because you didn't know when you'd have another chance. Maya turned to face him, and for the first time since they met, she didn't try to hide her face. That's exactly how it was, she admitted. I renew the loan every week, but I never know if they'll let me. Some librarians are understanding, others aren't. David felt that uncomfortable sensation in his chest again. He owned a private library with more books than he could read in 3 lifetimes, and had never considered that access to knowledge could be a temporary and uncertain privilege. When did your mother first get sick? He asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Maya hesitated, then joined him, maintaining a careful distance. I was 12. Breast cancer, stage 3. My father, he said he hadn't signed a contract to care for sick people. Left home the week after the diagnosis. And you were alone with her. We were alone with each other, Maya corrected. It was different. My mother was always strong, even when she was weak. She taught me that caring for someone isn't a burden, it's a privilege, that when you love someone, you don't count the cost. David thought of his own parents, killed in a car accident when he was 15. He remembered how he had been raised by uncles, well-intentioned, people who provided everything he needed materially, but who saw love as a limited commodity that should be distributed carefully so it wouldn't run out. Why didn't you ever ask for help when your mother was sick? From whom? Maya shrugged. Everyone has their own problems, and besides, help comes with strings. It always comes with strings. There are government programs, organizations. I tried. Bureaucracy takes months. My mother didn't have months. Maya looked at her hands. I learned that if you want something done right, especially if it's something important, you do it yourself. They sat in silence for a few minutes. David watched Maya observe the room, her eyes cataloging every detail, as if memorizing something she knew was temporary. Are you afraid of me? He asked finally. Maya considered the question seriously before answering. Not of you, she said, but of getting used to this. She gestured to the luxurious room, of forgetting it's not real, of starting to think, I deserve this. Maybe you do deserve it. Nobody deserves this, Maya responded with a certainty that surprised him. Not you, not me, not anyone. Some people are lucky, others aren't. Deserving has nothing to do with it. David fell quiet, processing. In his 35 years, he had built his entire identity on the idea that he had earned everything through merit, hard work, intelligent decisions. The suggestion that maybe it was just luck, birth into a wealthy family, right opportunities. At the right time, privileges he didn't even recognize as privileges was more uncomfortable than expected. "Tomorrow we start," he said finally. "The team arrives at 8 in the morning. To transform me into a lady," Maya said, without sarcasm, just observation. "To help you feel comfortable in any environment." Maya smiled for the first time. A small, closed-mouth smile, but genuine. "David," she said, "I spent 8 years caring for a dying person, then a year living on the street. If I can handle that, I can handle an elegant dinner." She was right, David realized. Maya didn't need to be transformed into a lady. She already was one, just not the kind he was accustomed to recognizing. 3 months later, Maya was unrecognizable. The mole had disappeared after a 15-minute laser procedure. Her teeth, though still with invisible braces, already showed the results of months of dental treatment. Her hair, nourished by expensive products and regular professional cuts, fell in silky waves over her shoulders. She had gained weight healthily, her face losing the angularity of malnutrition and gaining the soft curves of well-fed youth. But the most notable transformation wasn't in appearance. It was in how she moved through the world, with the silent confidence of someone who had survived the worst and discovered there was still strength remaining. During a charity dinner the previous week, when an elderly lady had suffered a fainting spell, Maya had risen, instinctively applied first aid, and coordinated medical help with a competence that had impressed everyone present. "How did you know what to do?" one of the guests had asked. "I took care of my mother for years," Maya had responded simply. "You learn." David had observed the scene with a mixture of pride and something he couldn't name. Pride because Maya was doing better than he had dreamed, and that other feeling, more complex, more dangerous, because he was beginning to forget this was a temporary arrangement. Now sitting in his office on a Thursday morning, David looked at the $2 million check Michael had delivered the night before. The bet was won. Maya had not only integrated into elite social circles, but had stood out. People specifically requested to be invited to events where she would be present. She had that rare quality of making others feel seen, heard, important. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Harrison?" It was Jennifer, his assistant. "There's a call from a New York Times journalist. Wants to do a story about arranged marriages among the elite. Seems someone gave him a tip about you and Maya." David felt his stomach contract. What kind of tip? He mentioned a bet, said he has a reliable source. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. David hung up the phone and ran home, Michael's check burning in his pocket like evidence of a crime he was just beginning to understand. He found Maya in the garden, reading. She still read. Constantly. Now more advanced medical books he had bought for her. She was sitting on the marble bench under the white rose bush, sunlight creating a halo around her hair. She looked like a painting, a vision of serenity he was about to destroy. "Maya," he said, and something in his voice made her look up immediately. "What happened?" David sat beside her, the check weighing in his pocket like lead. "I need to tell you something, about how this started." Maya closed the book slowly, her fingers marking the page, a habit she had maintained even now that she could buy any book she wanted. "Okay," she said simply. "There was a bet." The words came out like a forced confession. "Michael, my partner, he bet I couldn't transform you into a convincing lady in 3 months. $2 million. Maya became very quiet. David could hear his own breathing, the distant noise of traffic, the buzzing of bees in the roses. He could hear everything except her thoughts. "A bet," she repeated. "Finally. Of course, it makes sense." "But it changed," David said quickly. "You changed it. Changed everything." Maya stood from the bench, walked to the rose bush, and touched one of the white flowers with her fingertips. "No, David," she said without turning around. "You're the one who changed. The question is, into what? Into someone who fell in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. Maya turned slowly, and David saw something in her eyes he had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hurt. It was disappointment, and somehow that was worse. "You're confusing gratitude with love," she said softly, "and you're confusing prudence with fear. Maybe, but I'd rather be wrong being cautious than wrong being naive." Maya walked back to the bench but didn't sit. Instead, she stood before him, and David had the strange sensation that despite her looking down, he was the one being evaluated. "I cancelled the bet," he said desperately. "I don't want Michael's money." Why? Because I discovered you were already a lady. I was the one who needed to learn to be a gentleman. Maya smiled, a sad smile that broke his heart. David, you're a good man who did a bad thing for reasons you thought were right. That doesn't make you a monster, but it also doesn't erase what happened. What do you want from me? He asked, and for the first time in his adult life it sounded like a plea, not a negotiation. I want time, Maya said. I want to process this. I want to find out if what I feel for you is real or if it's gratitude mixed with emotional Stockholm syndrome. And if it's real, then maybe we'll have a different conversation. Maya picked up the book from the bench and walked toward the house. At the door, she stopped and turned. David? Yes? Thank you for telling me the truth. I know it wasn't easy. And then she went inside, leaving David alone in the garden with his roses and his conscience and the weight of $2 million that suddenly seemed completely worthless. 6 months passed like pages being turned slowly in a book. David didn't know if he wanted to finish. Maya had moved to an apartment in Brooklyn, nothing extravagant but clean, safe, hers. She used part of the money David had insisted she keep to pay for an accelerated nursing course and was working part-time at a community clinic in Queens. David knew this through discreet research he felt bad about doing, but couldn't avoid. He discovered Maya worked mainly with elderly and terminal patients, that her supervisors adored her, that patients specifically asked for her. He discovered she had rented a small studio 2 blocks from the clinic, so she wouldn't need to take public transportation late at night. He discovered she still read constantly, but now they were books on palliative medicine and grief psychology. He hadn't tried to contact her. This was part of their unspoken agreement. She needed space to discover who she was, away from his influence, away from gratitude and emotional confusion. But the space was killing David in ways he hadn't anticipated. For the first time in his adult life, he had discovered there were problems money couldn't solve, that there were wounds contracts couldn't heal, that there were some things, the most important ones, that couldn't be bought, sold, or negotiated. On a December afternoon, when the first snow of winter was beginning to fall over Manhattan, David finally took the subway to Brooklyn. Not the private driver, not Uber, but the actual subway, something he hadn't done in over 15 years. He wanted to arrive at Maya's apartment the same way any ordinary person would arrive. He wanted this meeting to be between equals, not between a millionaire and someone he had saved. Her apartment was on the 2nd floor of a pre-war building that had been carefully restored. David climbed the stairs, feeling his heart beat irregularly, not from physical exertion, but from nervousness. What would he say? How would he explain 6 months of absence? How would he ask for a second chance without sounding like he was making another business proposal? He knocked on the door before he could lose courage. "One moment," came Maya's voice from the other side. Footsteps approached, a lock turned, and then she was there. She looked, well, more than well. She looked happy. Her hair was tied in a practical bun. She wore colorful scrubs. Obviously, she was returning from work. She had no makeup, wore no expensive jewelry, none of the accessories that had become part of her identity during the 3 months they spent together. But there was something in her eyes, a peace, a certainty, that made her look more beautiful than ever. "David," she said, and there was no surprise in her voice. There was no anger either, just careful curiosity. "Hi," he said, and immediately felt like an awkward teenager. Can I come in?" Maya hesitated for just a second, then opened the door. Wider. The apartment was small but cozy, a living room that also served as a kitchen, a bedroom he could see through a half-open door, a tiny bathroom. But it was full of life in a way his mansion never had been. Plants in the windows, smiling photos of patients on the refrigerator, books piled on every available surface. It smelled of freshly brewed coffee and that soft perfume she wore, not expensive, but distinctly hers. "Coffee?" Maya asked, already moving toward the small coffee maker. "Please." They sat at the kitchen table, a small round table that had probably cost less than David spent on a single meal, but somehow seemed more real than any furniture in his house. "How are you?" he asked, conscious of how inadequate the question sounded after 6 months of silence. "Good," Maya replied, and he could see it was true. "Working a lot, learning a lot, discovering who I am when I'm not trying to be someone another person needs me to be." The phrase was said without malice, but David felt the blow anyway. And did you discover? Maya smiled. A real smile. Not the careful, closed-mouth smile she used to give when feeling insecure. I'm discovering. Apparently, I'm someone who likes taking care of people who are dying, who finds purpose in being present during the worst moments of someone's life, who prefers small apartments to mansions because it's easier to keep everything clean. And about me? David asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. Did you discover what you feel about me? Maya held the coffee cup between both hands, as if warming herself. Outside, the snow had increased, creating a cocoon of intimacy around the small apartment. I discovered that what I felt for you was real, she said finally. But I also discovered that real isn't enough. David felt like he had been punched in the stomach. What else is needed? I need to know that you chose me, not that you found me. I need to know that you would love me if you met me. Today, working at that clinic, living in this apartment with no dramatic transformation story to impress your friends. I choose you, David said immediately. Now, today, just as you are. But you don't know me as I am, Maya responded gently. You fell in love with a version of me that was created to meet a need of yours, a version that wore your dresses, lived in your house, attended your events. You fell in love with the Maya who existed in relation to you. David opened his mouth to protest, but Maya raised her hand. Let me finish. During these 6 months, I discovered I like waking up at 5 in the morning to meditate before work, that I prefer home cooking to expensive restaurants, that my favorite TV show is a reality show about people renovating tiny houses, that when I'm sad, I like cleaning bathrooms because repetitive physical work calms me, that sometimes I go weeks without wearing makeup and feel beautiful anyway. She paused to drink a sip of coffee. These are small things, David. Silly things. But they're things I never had a chance to discover about myself when I was trying to be the person you needed me to be. David sat in silence, processing. She was right, he realized. He had fallen in love with a Maya who existed in relation to him in his world, following his rules. He had assumed he knew who she really was, but actually had only known who she became when trying to please other people. What do you want from me? He asked again. But this time, the question was different. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a recognition that she had the right to set the terms. I want you to know me, Maya said. The real person. The person who lives in this apartment, who works at that clinic, who has opinions about things that have nothing to do with you. And I want to know you, not the CEO, not the millionaire, but the man who took the subway to get here today instead of sending the driver. David smiled for the first time in 6 months. How did you? I know. Because your shoes are wet from walked on snow, not from walking 3 meters from a car to a door. And because there's a subway map sticking out of your pocket. David looked down and laughed. A genuine laugh, not the calculated laugh he used in business meetings. I got lost twice, he admitted. Had to ask 3 different people how to get here. An elderly lady taught me how to use the Metro card. And how did it feel? Scary, David said honestly. And then, free. Like I was just any normal person trying to get somewhere important. Maya extended her hand across the table. David took it, feeling the contrast between her soft skin and the small calluses he hadn't noticed before. Marks of real work, of caring for people, of living a life that wasn't ornamental. David, she said, do you want to start over? For real this time? What do you mean? Like Maya Johnson, nurse, 21 years old, lives in Brooklyn and likes plants. And David Harrison. Who is David? Harrison when he's not trying to prove anything to anyone. David thought about the question. Who was he when he took off the CEO armor, when he stopped calculating advantages, when he allowed people to see him without filters? David Harrison, he said slowly, 35 years old, sometimes stays up too late reading biographies of people who changed the world, afraid his life means nothing beyond money. Recently discovered he prefers subway to limousine because on the subway you can hear real conversations from real people. It's a pleasure to meet you, David Harrison, Maya said, squeezing his hand. It's a pleasure to meet you, Maya Johnson. And for the first time, both felt it was true. A year later, David was sitting on the same marble bench in his garden where Maya had heard the truth about the bet, but now the garden looked different. Maya had planted herbs among the roses, basil, rosemary, thyme, because beauty is good. But beauty you can use is better. There was. Also a small vegetable garden in the corner that used to be just perfectly manicured grass. Maya came running from the clinic, still in scrubs, hair escaping from her bun. It was a scene that repeated 3 times a week. She finished the afternoon shift and came to his house for dinner, sometimes stayed to sleep, sometimes returned to her apartment. They had discovered that a relationship didn't need to follow a traditional schedule to be real. "How was your day?" David asked, standing to kiss. "Her? Mrs. Patterson went home today," Maya said, smiling. 3 months of chemotherapy, but she's responding well. And Mr. Rodriguez finally let his family visit him. He was ashamed of his appearance, but I convinced him that love doesn't see appearance." David pulled her to the bench, observing how she always shared the small victories of her patients as if they were her own. It was one of the things he had learned about the real Maya. She carried other people's hopes and fears with the same seriousness most people carried their own concerns. "And you?" Maya asked. "How was the foundation meeting?" David smiled. 6 months ago, he had started a foundation that funded home medical care for families who couldn't afford it. The idea had emerged after one of Maya's stories about a patient who needed care, but whose family lacked resources. Instead of just writing a check, David had created something systematic, sustainable. "They approved funding for 50 more families," he said. "And they want to expand to other cities. I'm proud of you," Maya said, resting her head on his shoulder. It was a simple phrase, but it meant more to David than any congratulations from colleagues or article in business magazines, because it came from someone who knew him, the man who was still sometimes too competitive, who occasionally used money to solve problems that should be solved with patience, who was slowly learning that vulnerability wasn't weakness. "Maya," he said, feeling. Something in his pocket burned like Michael's check had burned a year ago, but for completely different reasons. "I have a proposal for you." Maya lifted her head, a playful smile on her lips. "Another business proposal, Mr. Harrison. This time, it's personal, Ms. Johnson." David slid from the bench to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside, a simple ring, not the extravagant diamond he would have chosen a year ago, but a single delicate stone that shone softly in the golden light of late afternoon. "Maya Johnson," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Nurse, herb grower, the bravest person I know. You taught me that real wealth has no market price, that dignity doesn't need degrees, that loving someone means knowing them, not transforming them." Tears began to form in Maya's eyes. "You changed my life not because you let me save you, but because you showed me I was the one who needed saving. From a life without real purpose, from relationships without real intimacy, from success without real meaning." David took a deep breath. "So my proposal is this. Marry me. Not because I need a wife for business, not because you need to be saved, but because we discovered we're better together than apart. Because you make my plants grow and I make you laugh. Because we built something real on the foundation of something that started false." Maya was crying openly now, but smiling too. "And this time," David continued, "there's no contract, no deadline, no money involved, just 2 people who chose each other after discovering who they really are." "David," Maya said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, your proposal is accepted." When David slipped the ring on her finger, both knew this time was forever. Not because they had signed papers or made public promises, but because they had chosen to know each other completely, imperfections, fears, small and big dreams, and had decided they wanted to build a life on this foundation of absolute truth. 6 months later, Maya and David married in a small ceremony in the garden where everything had begun to change. The herbs she had planted perfumed the air, the clinic patients who had become family were present, and even Michael, who had learned some lessons of his own about the real value of people, was there to witness. But the most important part wasn't the ceremony. It was the conversation they had the night before, sitting on the marble bench under the stars. "You know what's funny," Maya had said. "When we met, I had nothing but my dignity, and you thought that wasn't enough. And now?" David asked. "Now I know it was more than enough. It was everything. It was exactly what you needed to learn was possible to buy. Not with money, but with respect, with genuine choice, with love that doesn't come with conditions." David pulled her closer. "And I learned you were right from the beginning." he said. Some people are lucky, others aren't. Deserving has nothing to do with it. But what we do with our luck, that's our choice. And I choose to use mine to build something that matters, with someone who matters. To build a life that's not just rich, Maya added, but also generous. Rich in generosity, David agreed. And as they sat there, surrounded by plants they had grown together, planning a foundation that would grow to help more families, knowing they would wake up in the morning to jobs they loved with people who mattered, both understood they had. Discovered the kind of wealth that cannot be measured in numbers, the only wealth that once found can never be lost, the wealth of knowing yourself completely and choosing to love anyway, the wealth of building something bigger than yourselves, the wealth of discovering that dignity, after all, wasn't something Maya possessed despite her poverty. It was something both had learned to possess because of their shared humanity, and that, they discovered, was worth more than all the millions in the world. This story touched you as it touched me. Rate from 1 to 10. What score do you give to this transformation journey? And tell me in the comments, do you really believe people can change? That a cruel bet can transform into true love? Share your stories. They can serve as inspiration for our channel. The Harrison Foundation's annual gala was unlike any charity event Manhattan had ever seen. Instead of the usual stuffy ballroom in a 5-star hotel, Maya had insisted they host it at the community center in Queens, just blocks from the clinic where she now served as head nurse. The decorations weren't elaborate floral arrangements that cost more than most people's monthly rent, but simple white lights strung between the rafters and centerpieces made from herbs grown in the foundation's community gardens. David stood at the back of the room, watching Maya address the crowd of 300 people. Donors sat alongside former homeless individuals who had received housing. Assistants, wealthy socialites chatted with single mothers who had benefited from the foundation's childcare programs, and teenagers from the scholarship program served as volunteer coordinators for the evening. 5 years ago, Maya was saying, her voice carrying easily through the room without a microphone, I learned that dignity isn't something you lose when you lose everything else. It's something that grows stronger when everything else is stripped away, because it's the only thing that truly belongs to you. She paused, her eyes finding David's across the crowded room. Even after all this time, that look still made his heart skip a beat, not with the desperate intensity of new love, but with the steady certainty of someone who had chosen and been chosen, day after day for years. The Harrison Foundation exists because we believe that everyone deserves a chance to rebuild, not to be rebuilt by someone else's vision of who they should become. We provide resources, support, and, most importantly, respect for the choices people make about their own lives. The applause was genuine, not polite. David noticed Mrs. Rodriguez from the clinic wiping tears from her eyes, while her teenage daughter, now a pre-med student thanks to the Foundation's scholarship program, beamed with pride. In the front row, Michael sat with his own wife, a former public school teacher he had met while volunteering at one of the Foundation's literacy programs. The man who had once seen people as chess pieces had discovered through David and Maya's example that human beings were far more interesting when treated as human beings. After the formal presentations ended and the crowd dispersed into smaller conversation groups, David found Maya in the community garden behind the center. She was deadheading roses under the soft glow of string lights, her elegant dress from the evening now covered by an old cardigan she kept in her office for exactly these moments. "Escaping your own party?" he asked, settling beside her on a wooden bench they had built together the previous spring. "Just needed a minute," Maya said, continuing to tend the flowers. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real." "What part?" "All of it. The foundation, the clinic, us." She gestured to the garden, then to him. "Sometimes I wake up and expect to be back on those steps, wondering if the library will let me renew my book for another week." David was quiet for a moment. Even after 5 years of marriage, 3 years of running the foundation together, and countless conversations about their past, Maya still occasionally struggled with what she called imposter syndrome, the feeling that she was somehow pretending to be someone she wasn't meant to be. "Do you remember what you told me the night before our wedding?" he asked. "About dignity? That it wasn't something I had despite being poor. That it was something you had because you were human. Period. No qualifications needed." David picked. up her hand, noting the small scar on her thumb from a rose thorn that had gotten her earlier. "Maya, you didn't become worthy of this life when you moved into my house, or when you learned to navigate charity galas, or when you helped start a foundation. You were always worthy. The only thing that changed was that you finally had people around you who recognized what was already there." Maya leaned against his shoulder, breathing in the scent of night-blooming jasmine they had planted on their first wedding anniversary. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had said no to Michael's bet?" she asked. "Every day," David admitted, "but not because I regret it, because I wonder how many other people are out there right now, sitting on steps or sleeping in shelters, or working 3 jobs just to survive. Who could change the world if someone just gave them a real chance?" "Is that why you wanted to expand the foundation nationally?" David nodded. "I keep thinking about what you said that first day, that everyone has their own problems so people don't ask for help. But what if we made it easier? What if instead of making people jump through hoops to prove they deserve assistance, we just helped?" Maya smiled, the kind of smile that had first told him she was different from anyone he had ever met. Not because she was grateful, but because she understood something about human nature that he was still learning. "You know what I love most about our story?" she said. "What? It's not a story about a rich man saving a poor woman. It's not even a story about 2 people falling in love. It's a story about 2 people who learned to see each other as fully human, and then decided that was enough to build a life on." "More than enough," David agreed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the distant sounds of the city and the closer sounds of their guests slowly departing. David thought about the Maya he had first seen in that photograph, thin, guarded, reading a nursing textbook on concrete steps. He thought about the man he had been then, successful by every external measure, but hollow in ways he hadn't even recognized. "Maya," he said finally. "I have another proposal for you." She lifted her head to look at him, eyebrows raised in mock suspicion. "Oh, really? What kind of proposal, Mr. Harrison?" "The kind where we adopt that teenager from the clinic, the one who's been aging out of foster care." "Carmen." Maya sat up, straight, fully alert now. "David, are you serious? Carmen reminds me of you at that age, not because of her circumstances, but because of the way she reads medical journals in the break room, like each word might be her only chance to learn something important, because she asks questions about patient care that most nursing students wouldn't think to ask, because she has this quiet dignity that no amount of trauma has been able to touch." Maya was quiet for a long moment, processing. They had talked about children before, but always in abstract terms, someday terms. This was concrete, immediate, real. "She's 17, Maya said slowly. "She'll be 18 in 6 months. Technically, she doesn't need parents anymore." "She doesn't need guardians," David corrected. "But she needs family. She needs people who will show up for her college graduation, who will call her on her birthday, who will be there when she gets her nursing license, and when she buys her first house, and when she has hard days that feel impossible to survive." "You've really thought about this?" "I've been thinking about it since the day I found her reading my old copy of Principles of Internal Medicine during her lunch break. When I asked her where she got it, she said you lent it to her. And when I asked why she was reading it instead of eating, she said learning was more important than food because knowledge was something no one could take away from her." Maya's eyes filled with tears. "She said that?" "She said that. And I realized that Carmen at 17 is asking the same questions you were asking at 20. Not, how can someone save me? But how can I learn enough to save myself and maybe help other people too?" Maya stood up and began pacing between the raised garden beds, her mind clearly racing through possibilities and logistics and hopes and fears. "We'd need to be careful," she said finally, "not to overwhelm her, not to make her feel like another project." "Agreed. And we'd need to let her set the pace. Let her decide how much family she wants, how much space she needs. Of course. And we'd need to be prepared for the possibility that she might say no, that she might not want parents at this stage in her life." "Also agreed." Maya stopped pacing and looked at him directly. "David? Why now? Why Carmen? Really?" David stood and walked to where she stood among the tomato plants they had grown from seeds. "Because 5 years ago someone took a chance on a young woman reading a textbook on concrete steps. And that decision didn't just change her life, it changed the life of everyone she's touched since then. Every patient who's received better care because of your skills, Every family our foundation has helped, every person who's learned something about dignity and worth from watching how you move through the world." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Carmen is reading textbooks on break room chairs. Maybe if someone takes a chance on her, in 20 years there will be another foundation, another clinic, another young person getting a chance because Carmen decided to pay it forward." Maya was crying now, but still smiling. "You're talking about starting a dynasty of hope. I'm talking about recognizing that love multiplies when you share it, that the best way to honor what we've built is to keep building." Maya wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a small smudge of dirt on her cheek from the gardening. David reached over to brush it away, but stopped himself. He had learned to love these small imperfections, these signs that Maya lived a real life with her hands in soil and her heart in service to others. "So," she said finally, "how do we ask a 17-year-old if she wants to be part of our family?" "Very carefully," David said, "and with a lot of ice cream." Maya laughed, the same laugh that had first made him realize laughter was something he had been missing from his life without knowing it. "David." "Harrison," she said, "5 years later and you're still full of surprises." "Maya Harrison," he replied, "5 years later and you're still teaching me that the best surprises are the ones that make life bigger, not smaller." As they walked back toward the community center to help clean up from the evening's event, Maya slipped her hand into his. The simple gold band on her finger caught the light from the string lights overhead, but David found himself looking instead at the small calluses from her work, the short nails kept practical for patient care, the slight ink stain from the pen she always carried. These were the hands that had turned his house into a home, his garden into a sanctuary, his success into service. These were the hands that had shown him what real wealth looked like, not in bank accounts or real estate portfolios, but in the countless small acts of care that made up a life worth living. Tomorrow, they would ask Carmen about joining their family. Next month, they would break ground on the Foundation's first residential facility for aging out foster youth. Next year, they would celebrate the 5th anniversary of Maya's graduation from nursing school and the 3rd anniversary of her promotion to head nurse. But tonight, walking hand in hand through a community garden in Queens, surrounded by plants they had grown and people they had served and dreams they had built together, David and Maya Harrison knew they had already won the only bet that mattered. The bet that two people could choose to see each other completely and love what they found there. And unlike Michael's original wager, this was a bet where everyone who encountered them won too. What did you think of David and Maya's complete journey? Do you believe that real love can grow from unexpected beginnings? And what about their decision to expand their family? Does their approach to helping Carmen resonate with you? Share your thoughts below and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about second chances, real transformation, and the kind of love that changes everything it touches.